Good morning. Happy Tuesday to you. I'm Connie with Foote Title Group, and we are talking about property that you might want to sell or that you're looking to buy where the owner has passed away. So first let me say thanks so much for tuning in. I love having you all on, asking questions, interacting, looking at the information that we have, because we are really passionate about making sure you understand what's going on when you're looking at real estate to purchase or to sell. We want to make sure that all of the steps are easy to understand, that the process is smooth, simple, and that you actually enjoy the process, because that's what it's supposed to be about when you're buying a new home. Good morning, Helen. Thanks for tuning in. And if you're tuning in after on the replay, please feel free to pop me a note and say, hey, I really appreciate you taking the time to listen and view. So this morning and this week and last week, we've been talking about, both on our blog and our social media posts, we've been talking about estates. What happens if we're selling a piece of property that the person who owns it has passed away, or one of the owners has passed away? How do we deal with that? And so we're going to talk about that for just a minute. And let me know if you have any questions. Please check in and let me know that you're on, if you're on this morning having coffee with Connie. So if you are buying or selling let's talk about selling first. If you're selling a piece of property that one of the owners or the owner has passed away, what you have to remember is when that person passes away, they no longer are here to sell their piece of that interest in that property. So what do we have to do? We have to make sure that their interest is covered so that there's a mechanism for being able to sell their interest. So if someone owns a piece of property individually and they pass away, an estate must be opened, because we need to determine who actually has the right to sell that piece of property, because that person isn't here anymore and there's no way for them to sell their interest. So what we do is make sure an estate is open, and then in that estate, an estate actually assigns a personal representative or an executor or an executrix. That person acts on behalf of that estate. So now when that person passed away, that person isn't here to own that property anymore. So that estate, that entity, which is an estate, actually owns that property. And so that executor has the right given by the court when an estate is open to actually act on the behalf of that estate, because the estate isn't a living being, obviously, and can't sign documents. So that's the purpose of having an executor. One of the many purposes of having an executor of an estate is so they can act on behalf of that entity with matters of dissolving all of the property and things that need to be taken care of that person owned before they passed. So legally, for a person to transfer a piece of property that has passed away, we're really talking about, at that point, the person isn't there anymore, that the estate actually handles that. So once the estate is established, good morning, Diana. Thanks for tuning in. Good to see you. Once the estate is established, an executor is assigned, then the executor can actually act on behalf of that estate, signing documents, a real estate contract, transferring the ownership, ordering all of the things that need to be done, and acting on behalf of that estate. So we need to have an executor. Now let's talk about if there's more than one person that owned a piece of property and one of them passed away, because that doesn't necessarily have the same activity happening. So if a couple owned a piece of property, and last week and 2 weeks ago we talked a little bit about tenancy. Good morning, my sweet pea. How are you? So last week we talked about tenancy, and tenancy tells us who actually owns a piece of property and how they own it if something happens during that ownership. Whether somebody passes away, that tells us about judgments and liens and how we deal with those things when different people, multiple people own a piece of property. So if someone sells a piece of property, good morning, my good friend Pam, how are you? So if someone wants to sell a piece of property that they owned with another person and that person has passed away, then we go to look at how did they own it. So then that tenancy comes into play. So if you had a married couple that owned a piece of property together and one of them passed away and they owned it as tenants by the entirety, remember, as we talked about last week, they don't have to own it that way. But if they did, then their interest automatically goes to the other owner or their spouse. And so it doesn't have to go through an estate. That spouse can do whatever they want because they owned 100% with their spouse. So when the spouse passed away, the 100% automatically went to the other spouse. That's also true in joint tenancy. And remember, and I said in joint tenancy, good morning, Moni. How are you? Good to see you. In joint tenancy, it could be two people or it could be several people. And if one of those owners passed away, remember, joint tenancy is where everyone owns 100% of the property. So if one of those owners passed away, that owner's interest goes automatically to the other owners. So no estate process is necessary. If you have tenants in common, though, remember, as we talked about, everybody owns a divided interest in that property. Happy Tuesday. Everybody owns a divided interest in that property, which means if something happens to one of those owners, yes, an estate needs to be opened because their interest needs to be addressed. Because once they passed, there's not a person there to actually sign off on their behalf. So the estate has to be open where the court establishes who is the person that can act on behalf of that person that passed away. So with an estate, or when someone passes away, you have a lot of different nuances, and it all goes back to how did they own the property and who owned the property, and then how are we going to address that. Remember that estate is an entity. It's not a physical being. So when the court establishes that executor, then we can actually proceed, and that person can take care of things on behalf of that estate. And when you're talking about an estate, if a person owned a piece of property, say in Maryland, but they live in California, the estate in California is wonderful, but it cannot deal with the property in Maryland. So a mini estate would have to be opened in Maryland to address that piece of property in Maryland, or whatever state that happened to be, because someone local would have to take care of that. And the executor doesn't necessarily have to be a local person, but they have to come to the court and be addressed by the court and the orphans court, and that has to be set up for that estate properly to be taken care of, and that property to properly be taken care of. Even if that's the only thing that is owned in this particular state, a mini estate would have to be open, so that's properly addressed, so you can deal with what happens when they pass away. Now, one thing I wanted to point out about this, which is a little bit tricky, but it's an estate planning process. A lot of people, last week I posted something about if someone passes away, what happens, and a lot of people have chosen to go the trust route for owning property and other things that they own because of some things that they needed to deal with through tax and estate planning purposes while they were here. So a trust is a totally different setup, and a trust, again, an entity. A trust can't do anything on its own behalf. But a lot of people have set up trusts to deal with their property for estate planning purposes and taxing purposes, and those trusts define in them what happens. Now remember, if you have a trust, that trust owns the property, not the person. So even though you have a trustee that may act on behalf of that trustee is just the person that acts on behalf of the trust. That trust is what owns that property, not the person that put it into the trust. So if that person passes away, the trust lists what happens and who would be set up to take over. So sort of similar in the estate process, just that it's already been set up in advance, and who the trustee is that would handle any matters of that property, and that trust would actually step in and take care of that. So if you have your property already set up in a trust, it already delineates what happens in different circumstances and who would take care of those things. So that would not be an estate planning purpose because, as I said, the trust is an entity that owns that property, not that individual. So you're not dealing with a person that's passed away. The trust has already established all of that. So that's my 2 minutes for this morning, and hopefully that gave you a little bit of insight on how to deal with those kind of things. But as always, we have so much information on our website. I've been working on blogs this week and last week and social media graphics about exactly these things, and you're going to see a little bit more this week that talk about some of these different little points. But also, if you have questions, please, please, please ask me. If something comes up and you don't understand it when it deals with real estate, I don't try to purport that I know everything about real estate, but I have been doing this for a long time, and I have a lot of good contacts, a lot of good business partners in the industry. So if there's something that we talk about that I don't understand or I don't know the answer to, I absolutely will look for that and get that information for you and get it taken care of and get right back to you. So I'm always here for information. Please, please, please ask questions. Let me know if there's something you don't understand. Good morning, Bart. How are you? It's been a long time since I've seen you, so glad that you tuned in. And hey, Mr. Jeff, good to see you. Thanks for tuning in. So we're wrapping up a little bit this morning. Good morning, Gerald. I'm wrapping up a little bit this morning. Again, we were talking about estates, talking about if somebody passes away and what the process is. So thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Connie Fuchsa with Foote Title Group, where we know how overwhelming the home buying process can be, and it is our passion to make it fun, simple, and easy to understand for you, because that's what it should be. And we, at the end of the day, we protect your home ownership. So when you walk away with those keys, you know that you don't ever have to worry about someone claiming an interest in your property. And it happens a lot, much more than you would think. So hope you guys have an awesome day. Thank you, Pam. Hope you have a great day too. And I look forward to talking to you all really again soon. Let me know if you have any questions. And again, check out our website. There's lots of good information on there. Sample documents, checklists, planning your move, home buyers guides, home sellers guides, all there for you to help you out. So I'm Connie Fuchsa with Foote Title Group, where we're protecting your home ownership. Have a great day, everybody. See you soon.